Welcome! Welcome to another GM Musings video where I talk about different GM related topics that might hopefully be helpful to other game masters and dungeon masters. Tonight's topic is one-shots, what they are and how to create good ones. Now let's start with a definition. A one-shot is basically a short adventure that can be played and finished and completed within, say, 4 to 6 hours, and that is in itself more or less complete. So the story comes to a satisfying conclusion at the end. And one-shots are extremely good for trying out new things. If you're a player, then you might be interested in trying out characters that you have never played before, but you don't want to commit to a full campaign while playing these characters because you're not certain if they will suit you. Maybe you've only played fighters so far and you'd like to play some sort of magic user. Or maybe you've only played a specific race and you would like to play a new one. One-shots are great for that sort of thing. You can try it out without committing to too much. If you don't like it, you spend a couple hours playing it and never play it again. For game masters, one-shots can be a welcome opportunity to try out new things as well. For instance, maybe you've only played in sort of a European medieval fantasy setting so far, and you'd always wanted to try out some sort of Asian or African style one-shot. Or maybe you've tried heavy combat-centered game before, and now would like to do some sort of investigative adventure and try your hand at that sort of thing. Generally, one-shots are a great way of experiencing new things, and I can heavily recommend even existing groups to take every now and then a break from their campaigns, no matter how fun they are, and just play a one-shot or two. Maybe you can even explore the same storyline from a different perspective. Maybe take over some NPCs that your player characters have met in the campaign and play them for a one-shot. That can be very rewarding. Now, one main concern about one-shots is time constraints. One-shots should be short-ish, playable in one afternoon, basically. So there's not really a right way to figure out how long an adventure will take. That sort of thing simply comes with experience. What you can do is you can create a one-shot with modular pieces in mind, encounters or NPC negotiations that can be taken out of the one-shot without destroying the whole storyline. So you could have 2 or 3 modular pieces that then during the play you can spontaneously decide to include or not include depending on what the time is and how fast your adventurers are progressing through the adventure. The first thing I do when I want to establish a one-shot is I establish the theme of a one-shot. The theme can be something like wilderness horror or urban investigation or the classic dungeon crawl, or maybe something slightly more exotic like a swashbuckling high seas adventure. So once you have established what you would like to play, tell your players. Now this is extremely important because in a one-shot, player characters should always be created beforehand. Unless you have a lot of time, like a whole day from morning to evening, then you can create your player characters at the start of the one-shot. But usually either you as the game master are making pre-generated characters that the players pick up just before they start to play, or the players show up with already existing prepared characters so you can jump straight into the game. And because player characters should be prepared beforehand, and the one-shot is much better if the player characters fit the theme, fit the setting. Always share what you want to play about, what you want to play in with your player characters before the one-shot starts. Now, once you have established a theme, the second thing I think about is what I would call the core of the one-shot, a central, extremely important element. Now, the core is something that can be a lot of different things. It can be a monster. Maybe you wanted to always try out a specific type of creature and send it against your player characters. It can be a specific NPC that you've had in your head for a while and wanted to put into your game. Have the one-shot centered around him. It can be some sort of environmental hazard. Maybe you always wanted to see what your player characters would do if they were faced by a snowstorm or a sandstorm or an earthquake or a flood or anything like that. It can be a specific conflict. It can be even a specific scene. Maybe you've always envisioned a scene where your player characters negotiate with an arrogant noble, but it doesn't fit into your campaign. So make your one-shot centered around that. So you have that core and you have that theme, and you can build the rest of the one-shot around those two things. So the rest of the one-shot is created bit by bit around those two core things. The third thing that I would create after that is the location. Usually one-shots, because they are short, are centered around a single bit of geography, unless you have some sort of traveling one-shot where the plot is to get the player characters from point A to point B. Then you might have several different geographical features that they travel to, but usually you only have one. It could be a specific village or town, or it could be an old ruin or a specific forest or a small range of hills or something that most of the one-shot, if not all of it, is set in. Take some time to establish the location a little bit, because the better you know the location, the easier it will be for you to improvise during the play of the one-shot if your players do something that you have not expected them to do. Now, once you have established the theme, the core, and the location, it is time to establish the storyline. How I do that is I like to start at the end. Start at the final battle, at the climax of the adventure. It's usually some sort of conflict. So think about what kind of final epic confrontation you would want to have at the end of your one-shot. Then once you have established that, jump all the way to the start, to the plot hook, basically. So how does this adventure start? Now, there's two ways really to start an adventure. There's the slow way and the fast way. The slow way is generally what I prefer, is basically a slow build-up. The player characters might meet with an employer, a potential employer that offers them a reward for completing some sort of quest, or they might slowly travel into a village and talk to a couple NPCs, and then something might happen. I prefer that sort of start because it gives the player characters time to get to know each other. Don't forget, after all, they do not know each other yet. They've probably never played with these specific characters before. And just in general, set the tone a little bit and give the players, and you, of course, as well, the chance and opportunity to ease into the adventure. Of course, if you have time constraints or prefer to start in the center of the action, then the second part of start, the fast start, is more preferable to you. A fast start is basically throw your player characters in the center of the action, maybe with just a few short introductory sentences. Things like, you have been traveling through a forest for a couple of days and are approaching a village, and all of a sudden you hear screaming from the side, and a bunch of people with weapons drawn is running towards you. That could be the start of a one-shot and throws the player characters straight into the action. Now you have established the climax of the adventure, the very end itself, and you have established the plot hook, the start. So you have the start at the end, and now you need to get from one to the other. So what you need to find is the paths, which are basically really the meat of the adventure. The paths that lead from the start to the end. I personally prefer not to use too many details when I establish these paths, because it is generally preferable, in my opinion, to react on what your player characters do. Give them a plot hook and watch them to see what happens next, basically. You should have some basic ideas, definitely, of different paths, maybe 2 or 3 or even more options that the player characters can take, different paths they can walk to get from the start to the end. But if you have established your location, as I said before, in detail, if you know what the core is and what the theme of your adventure is, the paths themselves will be fairly easy to improvise, especially if you're a more experienced game master. Now, once you've done all this, you have the story, you have the location, you have the core and the theme of the adventure. Now it is time to strengthen your cast. Usually every one-shot revolves around 1, 2, or 3 NPCs. Like I said in my GM Musings video about NPC creation. Some NPCs are more important than others, and you should spend some time to flesh them out. And now is usually what I do, is when I do that for one-shots. Give them some details and establish, as I said, 2 to 3 NPCs that are important for the one-shot and such. And then finally, at the end, give the adventure a satisfying conclusion. So make sure that there's not too many threads that are leading onward, except if you want, obviously, to turn this one-shot into a short campaign or a series of longer adventures. But then, of course, it is no longer a one-shot as such. Make sure if you're trying to run a one-shot that it is contained as such. Not everything has to be resolved, but player characters might feel unsatisfied, and it might take away from the experience a little bit if they don't have the feeling that the adventure is finished, really. What you can also do is, at the end of after the climax, you can give an epilogue. Now, because you don't know how the climax will turn out and what the player characters will do in the end, preparing the epilogue in advance can be quite difficult. So you just have a couple of ideas in your head what could happen after the climax. What I like to do is I'd like to give each player character their own epilogue, or an epilogue as a group if they decide to stick together. So ask your players, involve them in this. Ask them, what does your character want to do now that the adventure is over? Is he staying in the village, maybe taking up some sort of position there? Does he travel onward to more adventures? Make them pick up bits and pieces from the adventure and include them into the epilogue. A lot of players will turn out to be surprisingly good at this, and they will like it quite a lot. And then you can take what they have given you and weave it and mix it and create a satisfying conclusion and a satisfying epilogue for the adventure. So now I have shared my techniques for creating one-shots with you, and I would like to hear your thoughts on the topic, and also if you have any specific techniques that you use yourself for creating more one-shots. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel below the video. And thank you for watching, as always. Good luck in your own games, and I will see you on the internet.